Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin in the Middle East. It is being called the worst single-day death toll for the Israeli military since the war against Hamas began in October. We get the latest from Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson.
There was a serious attack on Israeli soldiers yesterday in Gaza. We know about 21 of them have been killed. They were looking to have explosives to demolish homes in the area when they were fired upon by a rocket-propelled grenade. Will that change the feeling inside Israel about the war? Probably not.
Bloomberg's Roz Matheson says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that the army will fight on until, quote, absolute victory. Meanwhile, 3 other Israeli soldiers were killed in a separate incident in Han Yunis, bringing the total one-day death toll to 24. Israel's military now says it has that southern Gaza city surrounded.
Now, staying in the Middle East, the U.S. is signaling it intends to wage a sustained campaign against Houthis in Yemen. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
The latest attacks against 8 sites hitting underground that the U.S. had housed arms and surveillance systems intelligence. It says the U.S.-UK operation did major damage and has set back Houthi efforts to carry out attacks on U.S. military and shipping in the Red Sea. The joint statement says, let us reiterate our warning to Houthi leadership. We will not hesitate to defend lives and the free flow of commerce. The Iran-backed Houthis also issued a statement saying the new aggression will not go unpunished. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Well, back here in the U.S., it is all about presidential politics. This is primary day in New Hampshire, and both Donald Trump and Nikki Haley have been urging their supporters to get out and vote.
Get out of bed and just get to vote. Grab your neighbor, grab everybody. You gotta go out because we have to win by big margins.
The former president led a rally last night in Laconia, New Hampshire, while the former South Carolina governor made her case to voters in Salem.
Chaos follows him, and we can't be a country in disarray and have a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos because we won't survive it.
The latest Real Clear Politics average shows Nikki Haley trailing Donald Trump by about 18 percentage points in the Granite State. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard has more from Manchester.
New Hampshire is famous for surprises, and yet I think that we are heading toward what could be another Trump victory based on the polling that we're seeing ahead of the actual primary kicking off.
And Bloomberg's Mike Shepard notes the primary did kick off at midnight on the East Coast in tiny Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, where all 6 votes in that tiny village went to Nikki Haley. Join us for a special edition of Balance of Power today, live from New Hampshire. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines will bring us the latest all day long, starting at noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, then again at 5 from the Granite State. And tune into our New Hampshire primary special coverage tonight at 8 p.m. Wall Street Time. You can hear and watch it all live on Bloomberg Radio and television.
And Nathan, turning to the markets now, futures are little changed a day after stocks closed at another record high. Meanwhile, Bill Gross has some advice for the Fed. Stop winding down its balance sheet and start cutting interest rates. We spoke yesterday with the co-founder of PIMCO.
The Fed should lower interest rates over the next 6 to 12 months. Real interest rates are simply too high. The 10-year real interest rate is 1.8%, which historically is very restrictive.
Bill Gross also said stocks are too expensive relative to the level of real yields.
And Amy, Goldman Sachs chief economist John Hatzius also thinks the Fed could start cutting rates. He says a March cut, quote, would make sense. And he spoke with Bloomberg from Hong Kong.
The Fed is on its way to achieving the soft landing. Obviously, no guarantees, but I like what I'm seeing.
Goldman Sachs chief economist John Hatzius says an easing in March would be consistent with the trajectory of consumer prices and comments last month from Fed Chair Jay Powell that the central bank would like to cut before inflation returns to 2%.
It is generally known that happy workers tend to be productive workers. Bloomberg's Jeff Ballinger reports on new research that shows the opposite is also true.
Gallup estimates disgruntled employees cost American companies $1.9 trillion in lost productivity in 2023. The report says more workers feel detached from their employers in the aftermath of the pandemic, in part because they no longer know what is expected of them. The stakes are high for companies. Engaged workers increase productivity, sales, and profits, and they're less likely to leave. Gallup says half of all workers now put forth minimum effort, something called quiet quitting. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Jeff, thanks. Heading overseas, Bloomberg News has learned Chinese authorities are considering a package of measures to stabilize the slumping stock market. More on that from Bloomberg China government editor Jill Desis in Hong Kong.
The idea would be to mobilize about $280 billion worth of funds, mainly from offshore accounts of state-owned businesses. So the idea would be this is all part of a stabilization fund. They would use this money to buy shares onshore through the Hong Kong exchange link to the mainland.
Bloomberg's Jill Desis says a gauge of Chinese stocks listed in Hong Kong rose on the news by 2.8%.
Staying in Asia, the Bank of Japan is keeping its negative rate for the time being. Policymakers maintained the bank's 0.1% short-term rate and kept yield curve control parameters intact after a two-day meeting. Speaking at a press conference after the decision, BOJ Governor Kazuo Ueda said that uncertainties related to the outlook for prices still remain high. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
Yeah, good morning, Amy. While lawmakers negotiate new policy at the southern border, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling concerning policing of the border. That story in this report from Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons.
The Supreme Court says it will allow federal border agents to cut razor wire that Texas installed to discourage crossings. That's while a lawsuit makes its way through the court system. The justices, by a 5-4 vote, granted an emergency appeal from the Biden administration, which has been in an escalating standoff with Texas over the handling of the border. The razor wire was installed at the request of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
Democrats in New Hampshire calling on officials to investigate some suspicious robocalls. The New Hampshire Attorney General's office says it's investigating reports of an apparent robocall that used artificial intelligence to mimic President Biden, advising people in the state not to vote in the primary. One of Boeing's biggest customers has lost confidence in the plane maker's ability to overcome the ongoing quality lapses that climaxed this month with a mid-air emergency on Alaska Airlines flight. United Airlines Chief Executive Officer Scott Kirby has been venting his frustrations with management to colleagues and voicing his concerns over the handling of the MAX grounding. In California, rain ripped through San Diego from North County to South Beach Monday, which led to flooding and rescues, as well as devastated homeowners.
All my collector's valuable cars, everything have been collected since I was a child. Everything's gone.
Cars were trapped in the water from the storm. Traffic was stopped. I-15 was closed for a while. The Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, that's a leading Harvard Medical School affiliated teaching center, is seeking retractions of 6 studies and corrections on another 31 papers amid allegations that some of its senior researchers falsified data. A spokesperson said while Harvard Medical School doesn't comment on individual circumstances, it's fully committed to safeguarding the integrity of its research. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Amy.
All right. Thank you, John. And we do bring you news throughout the day here on Bloomberg Radio. But now you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. Subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update, and for that, we bring in John Stashower.
Amy, was a night of big men scoring a lot of points in the NBA. In Minnesota, the Timberwolves' Karl Anthony Towns scored 62 points. He made 10 three-pointers, although the Timberwolves were upset by Charlotte. In Philadelphia, Joel Embiid scored 70. He had 59 while still in the third quarter. The Sixers beat the Spurs for their 6th straight win. Embiid shot 24 of 41, only made 1 3. He was 21 of 23 from the free throw line. Celtics won at Dallas, 119-110. Jason Tatum scored 39. In Milwaukee's win at Detroit, 31 points and a triple-double for Giannis Antetokounmpo. In Phoenix's win over Chicago, 42 points for Kevin Durant. Bruins made it 5 straight wins. They beat Winnipeg 4-1. College hoops, North Carolina now ranked 3rd, 8-0 in the ACC. Easy win over Wake Forest. Kansas dropped to 7th in the rankings. Jayhawks did win last night over Cincinnati. On to the semifinals for Novak Djokovic at the Australian Open. He took out the American Taylor Fritz in 4 sets. Fritz is now 0-9 lifetime against Djokovic. A struggle for Coco Gauff. She was down 5-1 in the opening set. She rallied to win in a tiebreaker, then lost a second set tiebreaker. She beat Marta Kostyuk of Ukraine 6-2 in the third set. We'll find out today who's going to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Adrian Beltre expected to shoe in his first year on the ballot. Joe Mauer may join him. Billy Wagner and Todd Helton came close last year. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager on this primary day in New Hampshire. Both Donald Trump and Nikki Haley have made their final pitches to the voters in what is now down to a two-person race for the Republican presidential nomination. And joining us now from New Hampshire is Bloomberg's Laura Davison, part of our political team covering today's primary and the race to come. Laura, thanks again for being with us. So we've heard from both Trump and Haley in their final Granite State rallies. Where's the enthusiasm?
Well, both Haley and Trump gave these very dramatic speeches last night. Haley's main argument was that Trump is chaos and America can't survive another 4 years of chaos. Trump then followed with a big rally, a very raucous rally with lots of protesters and yelling and even some QAnon slogans being yelled during pauses in his speech. And he ended in a way that he never really has before. He played this sort of low-level, almost trance-like music and kind of got quiet and then went through this long list of grievances of, we are a nation in decline. We are a nation of open borders where criminals are crossing. And so this was, different than how he has ended all of his speeches. But he really sort of made the case and tried to project this air of inevitability that he would be the one to win in New Hampshire today and quickly seal up this nomination.
Interesting to think about this sort of sinister end to a Trump rally. What does that tell you about potentially where he sees things going in this race?
He said very explicitly last night that he believes that he thinks that Haley will drop out very quickly. We'll see the results tonight will really determine the future of her campaign. If she is close to Trump or even beats Trump, it's very likely she will stay in. The next major contest in this race is in South Carolina, her home state, and not for another month. So that gives a lot of opportunity for, potentially the polls to swing in her favor. Right now she's trailing Trump significantly. So if she doesn't do well tonight, that would signal, that her campaign, her window of opportunity is closing.
Yeah, as we've been reporting, the polls show former President Trump with a double-digit lead over Nikki Haley in New Hampshire, something like 18 percentage points in the latest Real Clear Politics average. Are those polls necessarily reflective of the sort of moderate and independent outlook of the voter base in New Hampshire?
One of the things about New Hampshire that's a little bit tricky to measure, or one is they don't have any live voter calling polls like we had in Iowa. Those are known to be the most accurate, but they're also incredibly expensive to do, and they just don't have any in the state. So that's one issue. The second is New Hampshire is different in how it votes from many places, and that you have a large number of what they call undeclared voters. These are essentially independents and neither Republicans nor Democrats, so they can go in on primary day and request the ballot of either party. So because of that, there's a lot of, gray area on, who's going to go in, who's actually going to vote in which race, and how are they going to break. Independents in New Hampshire aren't like independents in other states where they tend to be more centrist, more moderate. Independents here run the whole gamut. So it's just a difficult way to sort of determine, if they're going to go Trump, if they're going to go Haley, if they're going to stay home, or if they're going to go for someone else, like Dean Phillips, for example, who's challenging Biden on the Democratic side.
All right, let's talk about Dean Phillips on the Democratic side, because we have been in discussions with the congressman who's mounting this primary challenge in a roundtable discussion with Bloomberg News. What's his pitch?
So he is saying that that Biden has done a good job, but his time is up, and it's time for him to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders. And Phillips he's a businessman. He's a little bit more moderate. than Phillips, than Biden. Though he's not particularly well known. He's been in Congress since 2018. From Minnesota, kind of came in kind of in a wave of anti-Trump backlash. The reality here is he does not have a chance to unseat Biden here, but he's sort of running his campaign as sort of to raise a protest to Biden running again after he said that he would only serve one term. So what you're looking for here is, what percentage of the vote does Phillips get? And that could really signal, kind of Biden's strength or lack thereof with Democrats.
All right, lots to watch as primary day is officially underway in New Hampshire. Laura Davison of Bloomberg News, thanks for joining us, giving us a look at what's going on in the Granite State. Now we want to turn to a conversation with the co-founder of PIMCO, Bill Gross, the self-described bond king, who says the Federal Reserve should stop winding down its balance sheet now and start cutting interest rates soon to avoid a U.S. recession. In a conversation with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick and Alex Steele, Bill Gross also said the yield curve has to go positive in order to produce that stable economy.
A negative yield curve, and I use the 2 to 10 year spread, which is about a negative 23 or 24. It's been as high as 50 to 75 basis points, so it's less negative now. But when you think about it, commonsensically, when you think about it, capitalism and a finance-based economy, which is what we have, can't really do well when you can get a higher return for less risk. That's not the basis of a capitalistic economy. You need to get a higher return for more risk, and it's just the reverse now. And so, I think ultimately the yield curve has to go positive in order to produce a relatively stable economy and a stable inflation rate around 3%.
Do you have faith right now in the economy and, more importantly, the folks who are shepherding that economy?
Well, no. Let me put it out there. The Fed has not done well in the past 3 or 4 years in terms of, or 5 years, in terms of trying to find that magic Fed funds rate that will neither increase inflation or produce deflation. And so, are they wise enough now to know exactly what the Fed funds rate should be at any point in time, or even 6 to 12 months down the road? I'd be very cautious, and I'd view economic statistics like they do, but from an investor's standpoint that speak to fundamentals that the Fed isn't necessarily following.
Well, let me ask you, what would you do different if for some reason you were magically in the shoes of Jay Powell? What would you do different at this point?
Well, I would stop quantitative tightening. I think that's just not a correct philosophy and policy at this point in time to continue to tighten quantitatively. They should leave the reserve balance around $7 trillion and just see what happens going forward. I also think that, yes, the Fed should lower interest rates over the next 6 to 12 months. Real interest rates are simply too high. The 10-year real interest rate is 1.8%, which historically is very restrictive. And, I think not only the Fed, but I would like to see the real interest rate on a 10-year come down to 1.5% or 1%. And so the way to do that is to lower interest rates from where we have it now at 5.25% for Fed funds, and to, basically balance out real interest rates and lower them so that the economy won't go into a significant recession.
So, Bill, if you think we're going to get cuts in the next, say, 6 to 12 months, are we cutting because of normalization to get that real yield kind of at a more normal level, or are we cutting because the economy looks really bad?
Well, we're certainly not talking about cutting the Fed funds rate based upon an economy that looks bad, although there are indicators such as the leading indicator number that came out today And other indicators that suggest, like we talked about in terms of the negative yield curve, that suggests that, at some point we're going to see a zero line, real GDP and maybe something lower. I think, to basically keep an economy going in this finance-based economy that we've had for a long time now, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you need interest rates lower than nominal GDP. That's what drives, basically today's economy as opposed to what we saw 50 to 100 years ago. And so with nominal GDP at 5 and 6% and perhaps headed to 4, but we need the 10-year to be lower than nominal GDP in order to continue a steady progression in terms of economic growth.
So, Bill, in that environment, does it make sense that equities are at a record right now based on what you're talking about?
Oh, no, I don't think it does. I mean, I've got some historical charts and others have provided those for me, Bloomberg being one of them, that basically suggest that PE ratios of 19 to 20 times, which is what we're at the moment, and perhaps a little bit lower based on forward expectations, that, PE of 19 times is much too high relative to a 1.8% real interest rate. Real interest rates were down at a negative, minus 2%, just as recently as 2 to 3 years ago. And so they've risen significantly, but PE ratios haven't really dropped. And so I think ultimately, and this is a long-term type of statement and a long-term thesis, ultimately PE ratios have to get more in balance with real interest rates, which are relatively high now.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Amy Morris. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.